Good morning, students. How was your night? Yeah. Last week we were unable to meet. However, we are meeting today after we must have met 2 weeks ago. And when we met 2 weeks ago, I could remember that we stopped at power, when various types of power were discussed, like economic power, private or charismatic power, normative power, and some other forms of power. But today, under Introduction to Political Analysis, we are going to discuss about what we call political power. Political power. This political power was part of the power we discussed briefly the other time among the powers we listed. We discussed briefly on about 6 or 7 types or forms of power in politics. But this political power is like a power known to be a major power among other forms of power. To that, we must take it as a subtopic. We are still going to emphasize much more on political power and how this political power is different from other forms of power. First and foremost, let us try to get it clear. When we talk about political power, a political power is a power possessed by the wielder, by the person who has been appointed or who has been elected or by divine to lead, by making a binding decision that affects all citizens, society, populace, or the public. If somebody is very much in position of authority to exercise his power by making a binding decision affecting the society generally, that means that person is already exercising what we call political power. And this political power, one can get to the corridor of power through appointments or being appointed, 2, election or being elected, 3, by divine. When we talk about appointment, that is when people come together to appoint somebody. You are the right person to lead us. You are the right person to take care of us in any community affairs, in any office affairs, in any political affairs. So, such person has been appointed to carry on responsibilities. If it is not by that way, it might be through election That is where people will now come out en masse to vote for a candidate of their choice. Where two or more persons are aspiring or contesting for a particular position or job, chances are given to the masses or to the public, to everybody, to exercise his or her franchise, the right to vote. And if among the contestants, a person who has the highest vote cast will automatically be declared winner. If a leader emerges through this process, we now say is now the winner and the election has been conducted and concluded. So the person who emerged through this process is through electoral process or election processes. Then when we say by divine, that is maybe as God proposed for the person, through royal family, maybe through church, as a pope, as a pastor, as a bishop, something like that. Okay. Having known what political power means, we are now going to differentiate differences between political power and other forms of power. Differences between political power and other forms of power. I told you earlier that we have political power here, and it was among the type or forms of power we discussed the other time. But as regard to the nature of its major or substance, we believe that this political power is more powerful to be discussed separately against other forms of power. And now we want to differentiate political power against other or all other forms of power. One, it is that time that the decision made would affect the entire society. Any decision taken by the under political power will affect the entire society, the general public, because it's a political power. But in the case of other forms of power, it only affects a section of the society. It is very clear. Any power exercised here, anybody decision taken here will affect the entire society. the popular. But in here, any decision taken from other forms of power aside this political power can only affect a section of the society. That means if this can only affect a section, that means this is minor and this is major. For example, when we talk about other forms of power, we have like economic power. And when we talk about economic power, it's the power one derives based on the money he has. Maybe he's a wealthy man or he's a rich man. So, but that power is only relevant to the society on the issue of money. Apart from money, that is not regarded again. Another form of power is what we call expert power or expertise power. That is the power one has on people based on his skill, knowledge, or talent. If you have a skill to become a lawyer by profession, so whatever you are regarded for in this discipline is only because of that legal law. Aside the law, we are not a medical doctor, we are not an architect. But in the case of political power, we assume that that person is a leader generally. There is no way he cannot lead the general public, whether monetary aspect, whether legal aspect, whether agricultural aspect, whether whatsoever, because it's a political power. And a political power is a power exercised by a leader who has been appointed, who has been elected or emerged by divine on a constitutional basis. 2. The second The second difference between political power and other forms of power is what we call superior. In the case of political power or under political power, the power there is what? Superior, binding all others, leading, the first class power that nobody can bring it down. But in the case of others, we say subordinates. It's a subordinate, just like next or followers. So the power of this is superior, while this one is subordinate. Minor, while this one is major. So these are what we regard as some differences between political power and what we call other forms of power. Then 3, belonging to states. When we talk about political power exercised on the basis of politics must belong to what we call states, because it has to do with the constitutions, and the control is general, that is the entire society within a given boundary. So the power exercised here belonging to states, while this one does not, because the power here, it might be, it's not a political power. You only have that power based on your individuality, based on your own experts, based on your own privatism, based on your own affection. For example, if I have money now, and then because I have money, I have been considered to be the main speaker in the community. That does not give me the political impetus, the political autonomy to control on a constitutional basis, because nobody has come together collectively to say, you, as from today, we have agreed upon to lead. But people recognize you as their leader because you are a millionaire, or because they believe you are highly educated and you are a legal practitioner. So if there's any issue, you can represent them because you are so outspoken. All these are not political power. So it does not have much to do with states. But when we are talking about political power, it's a power that based on the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and also based on everybody, populace, society, or the public generally. And it has to do with a binding decision that affecting the society. Then the welder of political power controls control welder of other forms of power. One other forms of power are under welder of political power. You can see the welder of political power, that is the person that exercises this political power, control other welders or other leaders of political power, other forms of political power. Is that clear? As I've already explained. So whosoever is exercising economic power, normative power, personal power, charismatic power, they are all under the political power. That is what the differences is trying to tell us. Then, from there, we now move to sources of power. Sources of political power. Sources of political power. Sources of political power. If we talk about the sources of political power, we are trying to talk about how do we get to what are the things that make us to get to the power of corridor. What are the things that make us to exercise that power? If all those things are not there, that political power we are talking about, we cannot exercise them. What are those things? Is what this subtopic is telling us now. Sources of political power. Where do we derive the sources? Where do we get the power from? What are the substance? What are the ingredients? What are the main frame? How do we come about this power? And how do we exercise them? That is what they are all talking about. Number one, sources of political power is what we call physical resources. Physical resources. What do we mean by physical resources under political power? When we talk about physical resources, what are we actually talking about? These are the resources used by the political welder, the political leader, to enforce the law, to make people understand that there is law, to make people obey the law of the land. If there is no source to this political power, people would have not respected the law of the land. Meanwhile, number one sources of political power is physical what? Resources. And when we talk about physical resources, what are we talking about? We are talking about weapons, e.g., weapons, ammunitions, armored car, etc. When we talk about power, though we will still come to authority, the two always go. But in this case now, we are only discussing about power. Time will come, we are going to discuss about what we call authority too. Like now, when we are talking about sources of political power, for somebody to become a political leader of a community, of a constituency, of a ward, of a local government, of a state, of a country, the source to that political power, there should be something to enforce, to use in enforcing the law, so that the power can stand. And those things are known to be physical resources. And under these physical resources, we have weapons, ammunition, armored car, etc. These are the physical resources set aside as a source or as sources to political power. are not on ground, how will you use an empty hand, empty mouth to enforce law or to enforce discipline? People, citizens will not respect it, will not be afraid of the law. So when we talk about fiscal resources, it's one of the sources of political power. Two, another source of political power is what we call economic power. When we talk about economic power is that type of power which relates to money. If you are rich, you are wealthy, that means you have money. And with money, everything can be done. Even these resources we are talking about, these fiscal resources, we use money to import them from another country. Where there is no money, what power have you? You are now a leader of a state governor without economic resources. What are you governing? The moment you are made to be a political leader of a given state, you must also have the ability, the financial capacity. You must have the financial enablement. Whatever the state wants, the state should be able to afford at ease. That is only where the state can move forward. So money or economic resources is a source to political power. As you are trying to find or get to the corridor of power, knowing in mind that economic factors is a concern. That is where this place is talking about. That means number two now is what? Economic resources. Then three, there is what we call personal resources. Personal resources. Aside what we call economic resources, another one is what we know as personal resources. For somebody trying to aspire for a political power, somebody who wants to be found in the corridor of power, you must possess what we call personal power or charismatic power. Charismatic resources, personal resources must be there. The third source of political power is what we call personal resources. And when we talk about personal resources, it has to do with what we call charismatic. The general characteristics of that person who is aspiring to become the political leader, to get to the corridor of power. What has been his characteristics? What are his elements? What can we find from him? So there are some people contesting that some persons have the likes of people and people have the likes of them. If you are somebody that people are not always interested in you, in one thing or the other, aside whatever you possess, it may be very difficult for you to win an election. Somebody with a good charisma is what we are talking about, the personal resources. For example, we have in the late Anambra State, we have man like Jim Nwobodo. Anywhere he goes, anywhere he went, anywhere he comes, people believe in him. Before you can source for political political power, what has been your political integrity? What are your political manifesto? Sell yourself. Can people have belief in you, even where you are? Can you be seen as somebody who is a deceiver? And a deceiver can never be voted in. So this is what personal resources is talking about. Personal resources. Personal resources. Personal resources is the third source of political power. For the first one, we mentioned physical resources, which I made mention of weapons, ammunition, etc. Second one, I said economic resources. The third one now is personal resources. And I was able to explain that when we refer to personal resources, we are talking about the charisma of a person. The general characteristics, the characters possessed by that person who wants to get to the corridor of power is the source. If your own character is the type of character people like, that means your way will be expressed. But if your own character is the character that people don't like, that means after a while there must be a close. Your own way is like a close, not expressed.